Okay, good afternoon. There's a theme picture of the Williamsburg Inn in Williamsburg, just off the William and Mary campus a little bit. And today, I just want to continue some earlier footage of the oral interview I did at William and Mary February 4, starting with what happened when I got back home from the expulsion. So let's have at it. I've got to find the place. It's at a specific time I marked off. So I got to get to that place. It's a little bit tricky to get to it exactly. There.
The house that night, very cold night, and back home, and the next chapter of life had to start for me. But um, my father would go down. What I was told was I could only come back if a psychiatrist said it was okay. And so then the story shifts to having the relationship with the psychiatrist. Well, you know that the psychiatrists have a mill going on, a cash cow going on by treating patients. They want to keep their patients so they can make money. So they don't want to give in, and they have an incentive not to let you go back. They have an incentive, and so the next part of the story would be not only my relationship with the psychiatrist, but what my parents' relationship was with him. And the way that folded out, we got a psychiatrist through a referral, and we had one interview with one, and I went seeing a Dr. Benham in Arlington, and Dr. Benham thought that he thought that, well, I wasn't careful about the consequences of my statements and actions. And he said, I didn't see people as people. Since you idolized this one friend, you don't actually see people as they really are. Like that's mental illness, not to see people as people really are, like a schizophrenic or something. And it's not a delusion. That's schizophrenia is delusions and hallucinations, and it's something a lot more specific than that. But so some of the things he said are not really true. But he eventually recommended me to go and have a stay at NIH. Even though I entered GW, and GW didn't have any problem with admitting me as long as I would live at home. So I did okay the first semester at GW, living at home.
So you started in the spring semester at George Washington University.
And I managed to graduate in 8 semesters, but I took a lot of summer classes and.
Well, let me ask. So you started GW, but your plan is at some point to return to William and Mary, or when does that go away?
Yeah, that's my father came down in February of 1962. Well, I had already started at GW. And he met with the dean, and the dean said, well, he could come back with a psychiatrist, okay, and you can be a junior with 55 hours at any time in 2 years. He could consider you coming back within the first 2 years if you have over 55 hours. And so the dean was nicer then to my father. But my father had a heart attack, and he had had a tire problem, a tire blowout or something, and the tire was being fixed while he was in the dean's office. We went back to the tire place to drive home, and he had a mild heart attack, and in the auto place. But he drove home anyway. He kind of recovered from that, and went to the doctor, and then the doctor put him in the hospital, and he came home pretty soon, and it was a mild heart attack, but it was the emotion of this would certainly could have contributed to it. So that, but then at NIH, there's a whole sequence of things that are interesting. Now you start covering that, like,
Well, so just so
Yeah.
the audience is aware,
Yeah.
you're now going to, so you're enrolled at GW,
Right.
and
And-
you're going to voluntarily to the National Institute of
Yeah,
Health
and-
to try to get classified as
Yeah,
heterosexual. That's the goal.
It's not mentally, it's not mentally ill. It's not clear, it's not really quite clear what the goal is. And
one more question. How were you feeling at this point? Were you confused? Like, you sort of have this involuntary coming out of the closet moment, and everyone is telling you you're mistaken, you're confused, you're not gay. How are you feeling? Are you feeling like maybe I'm not? Like, are you?
Yes,
how's
yes.
your head?
I'm more or less believed in the strict values. I believe that eventually I would probably be able to marry and have a family, but don't worry about it now. Finish your education, finish graduate school, finish all that. Don't make an issue. It doesn't need to be an issue now. You can have your fantasies, just don't talk about them. But so I put it aside,
Sure.
and there's a long series of little story circles, if you talk about screenwriting, of other series of incidents that happened that became provocative in their own way. Okay. Now, one of the things was why you were attracted to men, why men that were physically looked more virile than you excited you to be around them. Well, because you wanted what they had. In other words, if you had that yourself, then you could have a girl. But you have to be willing to live with what you've got, sort of thing. If everybody simply looked upward to who was the fittest, and we only had a world of survival of the fittest, we'd bring Hitler back. That's the name of this thing is what you call upward affiliation. There's a writer named George Gilder and wrote book Men Sexual Suicide in 1973, and then Men in Marriage in 1986. And he called that upward affiliation, one where people don't think that they're masculine enough to have a wife and children.
Is this what the psychiatrist was telling you?
What?
Is that what the psychiatrist had?
No, he
you?
didn't buy that theory.
Okay.
He didn't buy that theory. But books say that. There were books like Growing Up Straight, and books like The Sissy Boy Syndrome later, and so forth, that said things like that. So it is a very socially, it's a very divisive thing. And again, looking ahead, and this is jumping ahead a little bit, but to gender ideology today, one reason why some young people want to classify people not as men and women according to biological sex, but according to either have the freedom to be what they think they are, or even have other genders, is that they won't be compared to and thought of unfavorably when they're compared to other people who have more of what it takes to be a man physically than they have. So that they resent being put in and being looked at unfavorably. So if you have more categories you can put people into, and then use the right pronouns and be known publicly, that you'll be better off. Now that's kind of the ideology. That's kind of the theory. They deny it. They insist that they are that gender identity. You can't argue with why they think they are. They don't let you argue with that, because then their whole world falls apart. But it's the same kind of thinking that we were brushing against with the therapists, and it came up at NIH and therapy, and nobody really had an answer for it. I mean, but finally.
So can you tell me about NIH? How did you end up there?
Yeah. Well, the Dr. Benham, finally agreed. Well, because he knew about the program at NIH for college students. For students who had not adjusted to college, and they were very worried about this because of the defense and the Cold War and all that kind of stuff.
Was students who had not adjusted to college, was that a euphemism for gay students?
Was
that a euphemism for gay students? This program?
Okay. Not completely. When I got there were. I went to school at night while I was allowed to go on bus. to go to school at night, and I was a patient at NIH from July of 1962 until January of 1963. And there was a girl, there again, I'm not, there was a girl who called herself, who said she was a man, who had majored in anthropology. And she insisted she was a man. She just said, "I'm a man." She just actually said that. And I thought, in 1962, that was a pretty daring thing to say.
Sure.
There was another patient who came, who had a man's name, who was much more psychotic, who has screaming spells in the middle of the night and everything. And because she had a man's name, that suggests that maybe she thought she was a man. It wasn't clear from the group therapy. But then there was this young man who I didn't like, and we didn't get along. He was very uncooperative, who looked very feminine and acted very feminine. We didn't get along. And he might have been, even now, most people that are trans are not intersex, but this particular person, it's very likely this particular person might have been XXY chromosome or something, because he looked very feminine. It was very feminine to look at. And he was there for psychiatric reasons rather, when very likely he had some sort of physical problem that could have been treated with more modern medicine. They didn't have all the tests then. They didn't have everything. That was the period after which you would have Stoner and you would have John Money and you'd have all these people developing quietly gender ideology for all these years, and that we didn't hear about very much until after the pandemic, and all of a sudden it exploded. But that went on for years.
When
this
you were
kind of
there
discussion.
at NIH,
Yeah.
What are you thinking? Like, there are people here who have legitimate psychiatric
Yes,
disorders.
there were.
And
I had
yours-
a roommate who liked classical music, who was like me. He was a Jewish guy, and I don't know what his problem was exactly. And then some of the people seemed to be pretty intact, and I got along pretty well with 2 or 3 of them. And I don't know what their problems were. One of them said, if you have sick parents, you'll have sick kids. And one of them said, one of them said was there for apathy. I don't know what that meant. Like he flunked everything because he was apathetic. And I don't know what exactly all the problems were. We had group therapy. And one time we had a ping pong tournament. Ping pong diplomacy. Could be a movie, by the way. That's another thing. But we had a ping pong tournament with on the ward, and several of the people, I would beat several of the people because they would all slam erotically, and I would beat them by just letting them beat themselves by slamming and missing. And the psychiatrist thought that was interesting of me to play it that way, to let them beat themselves rather than prove that I was actually better than them. They kind of made a comment about that. That's real strange. But then in October of 1962, I was allowed to go in, because I was allowed to go to school at night. I was sitting in the student union at GW when the television came on and Kennedy started talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And when I went back to the unit, nobody knew about it. And the nurses and so forth, the doctor, none of them knew about it or were paying any attention to it. That was strange.
So you told them the
I
Cuban Missile
told
Crisis
them
was going on.
and what could happen, and they didn't even seem to believe it.
Sure.
They didn't even keep up with the news.
Wow.
This was grave, the Cuban Missile, we could have had nuclear war.
Of course.
And so again, I think movie, if you could play that up, and if you were ever have this period at NIH in a movie, you can imagine how that would look if you dramatize that now in a movie.
Well, it's a very
like,
serious matter, but it's also, there's an element of comedy that you are quote unquote a psychiatric patient saying, "Oh, there's nuclear war coming," and no one believes you,
Yeah.
even though you're completely
And,
correct.
and they don't bother to look to pay attention to the news to know that it's true.
Yeah. So how did you graduate, if that's the right
Okay,
word, from
well,
NIH?
then
Were you clear?
okay, then no, I was really able to leave. I just said we're going to stop.
Okay.
Because it's not. And so I went back to school full time, and then I decided to prove I could earn my own living and get a job at the National Bureau of Standards in the rheology lab, which was what measured the viscosity of oil samples, which was on Van Ness Street in Washington, which used to be in the buildings of the Federal City College. It had been a Federal City College before, and then it was the National Bureau of Standards. And I was a little bit clumsy in the lab, but I got better at it. But then a couple things happened. First of all, I was taking organic chemistry at night, and I got behind in the lab when we had an accident when I cut my hand, and they didn't let you make up labs, so I was going to fail the course because of an accident. And so I had to drop chemistry as a major. It was that simple.
Wow.
I mean, it's in the book and everything. But so I went to change to math, and I kept the job until the summer of 1964. And then what we decided is I would just finish school as a full-time student for the remaining 3 semesters. And my mental health became much better than it had been, because I had had some spells of anxieties and so forth, and still questionable feelings. So I decided, and when my life was stable and I could be a full-time student again, I got involved in the chess club, the GW chess club, and I started getting better at chess and winning, able to play in tournaments and win, have a decent rating and everything. And so that helped my life a lot. And and I went to New York with friends. I had made some friends at GW, and I noticed that many of them were either Jewish or Catholic, and not Protestant like I was, which is very interesting. And made some friends at GW and ran around with them. Went to New York with them a couple times. And then another, not this friend I was attracted with, another friend got married in New Jersey. We went up one day for their wedding in northern New Jersey and came back. I went on some hikes with them and so forth. So I had my friends and everything. I had somewhat of a social life that meant something for those 3 semesters from 1964 until I graduated at the start of 1966. Now,
so you're rebuilding a social life, but romance is still off the table.
No, romance is off the romance is off the table. It just isn't necessary at this time.
Yeah.
So, but other things were happening, like getting better at chess. Some other things were happening that were better, that made things better.
Yeah. Well, you graduated.
So I was in better shape when I went to graduate school. And then the interesting thing is that we had a big snowstorm before the day I was supposed to leave for graduate school, and delayed the flight a day and everything. Just
that's,
like the
University of Kansas.
Yeah. Well, I went a big snowstorm in Washington,
okay.
Just like we had this time.
Sure.
Very similar to this one. And I got there. I remember arriving there on Friday. It was a Tuesday night, February the 1st, and I was assigned a dorm room, which was room 907 in McCullum Hall in Lawrence. That hall has been torn down. It was a brick building, a 10-story brick building with 3 wings, and it's been replaced with modern buildings. They've replaced most of their dorms with more modern-looking buildings recently. But I had room 907. All 4 semesters I was there in the same room. But the interesting thing is the first day that I got there, after, flew into Kansas City. It was bitterly cold in Kansas City. It was like 10 degrees or something. Got a bus to Lawrence and got a taxi to the room and got the room assignment. I got up to my room about probably 9:30 at night that first night at Central Time, and I had the room to myself for maybe 40 minutes. And then the roommate shows up. And I thought, oh no, it starts all over again. So that's the end of almost like the first feature movie. That's the end of, that would be a way to end the movie, wouldn't it? To start a roommate and then wonder what happened. Well, that's the sequel.
Well, did you have?
Okay, I'll just leave it at that. And I think that's an interesting clip about my stay at National Institutes of Health, which is in Bethesda, just north of the city of Bethesda, Maryland, on Wisconsin Avenue. There's a big campus across from the medical center, Naval Medical Center, which is now Walter Reed, I think, which I've shown in a lot of other videos a picture of. So that's what I have for today, and I do thank you for watching.